All right. Well, I am Cal Rivet. I'm today interviewing my friend Nate on his sort of uh, theological evolution, his spiritual journey in general, and in particular, we're going to be discussing the topic of universal salvation. And it's a little bit like the talk that I did with Luke 1 or 2 weeks ago. And in the same way, there's no time limit to this interview. I kind of want to get into the personal as well as like the systematic theological relationships. And with that said, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us as much or as little about yourself as you want. Tell us whatever you think is pertinent to kind of set the stage.
Sure. Okay. So I've been thinking about this because since you proposed that we discuss it, and I'm trying to think of, so I would say that um my universalism is is natural to me. There's I don't, so it's hard for me to define any point where I became a universalist, but I can tell you the reason why I'm a natural universalist, that I can point to that. And I actually, it was necessary for me to be a universalist in order to be a Christian. Like there was no way that I could ever be a Christian without being a universalist. And the reason for that is very personal. It's my grandfather. So, my I was raised like in my early childhood. My parents were like evangelical, charismatic, Pentecostal types. Uh, and I mean, I was a kid, so I just parroted what my parents told me, and I would go over to my grandparents' house and like preach at my grandparents, you know, and I would say things like, yeah, Grandpa, I love you, but if you don't believe such and such, you're going to go to hell, and I don't want you to go to hell. So why don't you just believe such and such? I mean, so that's like, so as a child, so not a universalist as a child, because I not I not sophisticated enough to like understand the meaning of what not having universalism means. So, and the full weight of that. Um, but then I got older, and my grandfather was like, he, I mean, he was my grandfather, but he was also my best friend. Like, so, like, we did. I mean, he is the person who took me to all of my practices for sports, and I did like wrestling, boxing, baseball, uh, um, flag football, because they didn't have tackle football in my part of the country at that age. Uh, um, uh, so he's the one who took me to all my practices. We would watch games together all the time: baseball, basketball, football, college, pro. Like, so we like, and he would take me to games. He would take me, and he would take me to the. Okay, this is gonna date me. He would take me to the Kingdom to see Mariners games, which was the old that was the old stadium that the both the Seahawks and the Mariners used to play in. It was a really ugly concrete dome stadium. It was kind of an eyesore, but that was like the stadium at the time. And then he would take me to like local baseball tournaments at there. We lived in Grace Harbor, Washington, which is like in southwestern Washington, kind of like near the coast. And he would take me to Olympic Stadium in Hoquiam, which is like where they would have like regional baseball tournaments that were hosted there. And actually, there was minor league games we would see there too, because there were times where there were a minor league team would come in for a while, and then they would invariably leave. But there were times when they had a minor league team. In fact, like Bill Murray had an interest in one of the minor league teams that was there. So there was actually like a time when Bill Murray like came to Olympic Stadium like for one of the events. But so like my grandfather was, I mean, he was my best friend in addition to being my grandfather. So I cared deeply about him. My grandfather was a good man, like objectively. Like he had been a chef. Um he worked in San Francisco for most of his career as a chef before moving out to Washington. So he was like a big 49ers fan. That was like his team. Um, um, and then we for college sports. I mean, he's from Oklahoma, so for college sports, he always followed the Sooners. Um, and rooted for the Sooners. Although he would root for the Oklahoma State Cowboys in baseball because like the Sooners were never in the tournament, so it's like he would just root for the Cowboys because at least it was the Oklahoma team that was like in the college baseball World Series. They never won. They always were there and competitive, but they never actually won. But anyway, um, uh, so like so I the thing that made me the thing that in my childhood that like made me start doubting Christianity in the first place was twofold. Like, how could it be like how based on the theological framing I was raised in, how could it be somebody who was as profoundly good a person as my grandfather, who would like I forgot why I mentioned he was a chef. Like one of the things that he would do is that he would go to the mission and like hang out and talk to guys at the mission. And like a lot of times the like they were if they were like cooks, like experienced cooks, line cooks that had a problem with drugs or alcohol, he would like he would like bring them home, have coffee with them, and like talk to them and like try to help them get their lives straight, like recommend them for jobs to give them a second chance if he thought they were actually serious about like getting their act together. So like that's when I say he was a good person, that's what I mean. Like just things that are just like obviously objectively good. He was not religious though. He
That kind
never.
of stuff where you are personally interacting with people and mentoring them and working in the nitty gritty details of their lives to help them in really profound ways.
Yeah,
That's how
you're person making is what you're doing.
the
Like, and
kingdom of
that's what being good is. Like
yeah.
that's what good in any meaningful sense is like you are you are using whatever it is that you have to help lift other people up and make them more fully persons. And people who are stuck in addiction, they're not able to experience full personhood. They're cut off from that because of their addiction. So um that's just an example of when I'd say he was good. I mean, I don't mean it in a trivial way. Like this was definitely someone who was definitely a good person, and like everyone, like, and he was he was very congenial. He was always quick with a laugh or a joke or a smile, and like really everyone liked this person. Like this is like no one disliked my grandfather. He was a very likable human being, and he was really genuinely good, but he was not religious. Like for like and I spent a lot of my childhood with my grandparents because my parents got divorced when I was quite young. I was 5 when my parents divorced. My dad is gay, and the marriage was never going to work in the long run because my dad was gay. And So my mom kind of it was really hit my mom really hard. So when my parents split up, I moved in with my grandparents, and so I spent a huge chunk of my childhood with my grandparents. Church was not part of that. Like it was part of like when I at the times when I lived with my mom, church was definitely a part of that. But when I lived with my grandparents, that was not it was not part of it at all. And so like the closest thing we had to a religious ritual on Sunday mornings was to get up and watch the NFL Today together. Like so, it's like that's like so that was our ritual. Um, and so the reason this connects is that like I just couldn't so later on in my like I moved back with my mom when I was 11. So like from 5 to 11 I'm living with my grandparents. My grandparents moved to Bullhead City, Arizona, and they stay there for a couple years, and I lived with my mom from like 11 to 13. And then it's like she basically has to force me to go to church because I mean, I didn't like church is at the same time as the 10 o'clock Sunday morning game for the NFL. And it's like, that was my priority for sure. And also it's like, by this time, like by 11, it's like, I'm now capable of actually thinking for myself. And like, none of it makes sense to me either. It's like, so, and
May I
my,
ask, was this the Catholic Church?
no, I'm a
Okay.
convert. We'll get to that eventually.
Okay.
We'll get to that eventually. Pentecostal.
Oh,
Assemblies of
okay.
God. Yeah. So Michael and I actually like came up in the exact same like branch of the Pentecostal tradition. It was Assemblies of God churches. And which is what we went to when I was young too. So like when I was a little kid, that's where we were going. We were going to a big Assemblies of God's church in Longview. Um and so but I mean she forced me to go, so I would go. um but like me and my best friend would do things like we would make up alternate lyrics during the hymns, it's just like to make fun of them. And we snuck into the parsonage, the pastor's parsonage, to like go watch football like when church was going on. And I was agnostic. Like that's like I was like I never called myself an atheist, because I thought like I'm like because I kind of had this, I'm sort of like maybe just because of the cultural waters, but I think I would describe myself as being an intuitive postmodernist, because it seemed to me to be kind of obvious that you can't, like, finite foundations offer no certainty. So to me, atheism was as arrogant and ridiculous a position as theism, because you're claiming that you know this thing that you can't possibly know for sure. Therefore, agnosticism is the only possible, like, intellectually honest path. I also The problem of evil was like impacting me by that age too. It's like how can you how is this coherent? It's like so but I wouldn't go as far as to say there absolutely is no God, but if there is a God, he might be a bastard given the state of affairs, right? So why should I care about him? So in a way, effectively, so even though agnostic in terms of like intellectual propositions, effectively an atheist.
Correct. In other words, what is the difference between living in an indifferent universe and living under an indifferent God?
Right. Exactly. Yes. So um I okay, let's see. So that's like, and that's how I was until I was a freshman in college. A freshman in college. I was this like atheist leaning, like agnostic who was like de facto atheist in outlook, kind of like intuitively postmodern, like basically saying that we can't know anything for certain. That was my most fundamental intuition. It's like, you can't know anything, so why are you dogmatically declaring things all the time? And I stayed like that, and that continued to reflect my views. Um, so I I was here's the irony, is I didn't want to be like that. It's how I was. It's not like I didn't say like this is how I want to be. I want Because I actually wanted to have like some kind of like I wanted some firm certain foundation. Like, of course. I think everyone does, right? I think that's like I think everyone naturally, but not if you so it's a matter of not being able to see it. Um uh I'm a freshman in college. I decided I wanted to. I knew that I wanted to study great books. So in high school, I had been a debater, like a pretty good debater. Actually, Pepperdine University actually was prepared to make me a scholarship offer, but I actually refused to even meet with them, because I knew I didn't want to go there. So like, and my debate coach was like, really, he was like, you're an idiot. Cause he knew I had, because I just, because he knew he did not approve of the college that he knew that I wanted to attend. Cause I had by that point made the decision that I was going to go to the Evergreen State College, which is in Olympia, Washington, which is pretty close to home. And I had, basically I knew I wanted to study great books. This was the part that was for sure. And the reason I wanted to study great books is like, if I'm going to find any like things solid, I think the way to do it is by engaging in with the greatest minds that have ever tried to tackle these problems, right? And I had read a lot of philosophy in debate. Debate had caused me to have to read a lot of philosophy. So, but to read it for the purpose of like, I mean, was for debate. So always reading it for the purpose of, okay, this is going to help me bolster this argument. This is going to help me bolster this argument. So it was always in this sort of like, how can I use this thought to make the point that I want to make? Not
What Jordan Peterson would call
not
the
a genuine,
instrumental.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, and not a genuine, no genuine search for truth there. I actually have kind of like kind of have mixed feelings about debate and like what it does to people. To be honest with you. Anyway, I was very good at it though. Um, and um and I read a lot of philosophy because the style of debate I did was Lincoln Douglas debate, which is rather than teams, it's one-on-one, and they're always over value statements, so they become very philosophical. So it will cause you to read a lot of philosophy because you have to look for some sort of like philosophical foundation in order to engage in this values debate. Because if you're going to debate like which value is going, that's going to be philosophical argument always 100% of the time. So that's why I was forced to read a lot of philosophy. So I knew I wanted to study great books because of that. Like, because I liked that. I liked engaging with it. I liked reading it, and I knew I wanted to read more of it. And I knew everyone kind of assumed I was going to be a lawyer because I was a debater. I knew I didn't want to be a lawyer, and I knew I didn't want to be a lawyer because I had this like I still wanted to be a good person. Like, right? So I still had like to me like it's like this like objective moral goodness was like still super important to me, which is why I had which is the fact that like the religious system that I was brought up with would condemn someone like my grandfather, who was one like the best person I had known in my life, would say because you didn't agree with our abstract propositions, you are probably, if not certainly, going to go to hell, right? So it's like, so there was no way I was going to have anything to do with that. No way. It's like it was just like it would have made me a moral monster had I been able to accept it. Like really seriously. It's like to believe that your own grandfather is going to go to hell because he didn't say the right magic words at the right time. That's that is absolutely condemnable. I mean, there's no way that is a justifiable action.
Well,
Moral.
yeah, I mean, there is something curious about modern, especially Protestant Christianity, in how successfully it manages to decouple salvation from living a good life. And at least
Right. And
conceptually,
once saved, always saved Baptists are like the quintessential example of that too. And like one of the other churches that I went to as a child was that kind of Baptist church. So it's just like,
a lot of other religions retain what would appear to be this common sense understanding that whoever does right in every nation is acceptable to God, basically. And Jesus, he says, who is my family and who is my disciple is whoever is doing the will of my Father. And what is the will of his Father? Just saying the sinner's prayer? No, it's building the kingdom. It's imitating Christ.
Right. So here's right. And here's the thing. It's like this whole time I never stopped reading the Bible, and I never stopped being profoundly impacted by the Christian story. Not but I mean, I wanted to study great books, right? So I still like knew that this was important, but the understanding of it that I was being presented was just completely unacceptable. So I go to college, and I'm studying great books at Evergreen. I had decided to go to Evergreen, which was close to home. I had come very, very close to deciding to go to St. John's, which is a great books college in. They have two campuses. One is in Maryland, and the other is in New Mexico. I had wanted to go to the New Mexico campus because I was asthmatic. I thought the desert climate might agree with me. And I knew I wanted to study great books. But then I saw that Evergreen was offering a great books program the year I would be entering, and I'm like, well, let me just do this and I can find out if I really want to continue to study this because I mean, I'm young, I might change my mind. And the tuition is lower, and I'm going to accumulate less debt, and I'm still going to get to study what I want to study. I won't have the Greek, but I can pick the Greek up later. That's kind of like because there's 4 years of mandatory Greek at St. John's. So I um I go to Evergreen, and I'm studying great books, and I'm engaging. Like, one of the things we're reading the Bible as part of this in the great books program. We're not, I don't think we did it. I don't know. Yeah, we did some New Testament, and we actually read Luther's On Christian Liberty, which is like one of the books I hated most. Like, I just what like Luther was just like, I couldn't stand him. Like it's like I just basically disagreed with everything that Luther had to say. I really couldn't stand Luther. So um uh so I had this like visceral react. In fact, it's funny because I could remember like one of my instructors, I think he was some kind of like mainline Protestant. And I know he liked Paul Tillich, who's like a liberal Protestant theologian, but I don't really. And I know he went to Emory, which is like has like a Christian origin as a university. I don't actually know what his actual specific. I think maybe Presbyterian. I'm not sure, but he was trying to. I can remember him trying to defend Luther to me, but I was having none of it. It was just like, yeah, it's just like I really hated that book on Christian liberty. Was like really awful to me. um it would be less awful to me now because I think that the primary thing that offended me about it was that at that time, like any American, that came out of age in the era that I came of age in, like libertarian freedom was just like a obvious, like that libertarian freedom was the shape of freedom was just like a was like there was no questioning that because it's so built into our culture. There's no way you're going to question that. And on Christian liberty, obviously, is presenting a very different view of that. So I think that is the thing that I'm most fun. I probably would object to that less. I still don't like Luther, but I would probably object to that particular thing. That was the most triggering for me at that time. So anyway, we're reading this. We're reading scripture as part of the Great Books program, and it's like that's when I start discovering Christian anarchism because it's like I wrote a paper on like I wrote a paper defending Christian anarchism based on our study of Kings and Samuel in my Great Books program, and I read Jacques Ellul's Christianity and Anarchy, which is actually like a fairly new book at that time. This was 89 or 90 depending on which term it was in. I think it was I think it was 1990. Ellul wrote that book in 19, or it was published in 1988. That's when it was published, at least when it was translated into English. So it was a fairly new book. And I also read Tolstoy's The Kingdom of God is Within You. And so I argued like from a combination of like scripture and these external sources that you know that Christian anarchism was in fact the biblical political message. So I was a Christian anarchist before I was a Christian. So because I really thought, like, to me it's like the political morality of Christian anarchism to me made sense. Like if like being seriously dedicated to trying to build a society that is based on forefronting love and reconciliation as the pillars of building the structure, that's worth doing whether you believe the God, and that is the gospel of Jesus. That is what his gospel is. That's the gospel of Jesus. So whether you believe the gospel about Jesus or not, that is something that is worth doing. Here's the thing though, the very possibility that I can say that depends on the Christ event. Like there's no, it wouldn't be like the condition, like the conditions that make that something that someone can have as an intuition, like that's just built into their culture, that could not be if it wasn't for the Christ event. Like if it didn't act, so it actually ends up becoming a proof. It begins up becoming a. I didn't understand this yet, but if you really think about it seriously, if you take the gospel of Jesus seriously, it ends up becoming a proof for the gospel about Jesus. Because if you actually try to examine those principles from the standpoint of like cold logic, they don't make any sense at all. But yet we have this deeply intuitive felt sense that like, of course. But objectively, from the standpoint of logic, like it doesn't make any sense. And very few people, I mean, well, I mean, Nietzsche got that. Like that's what Nietzsche was. That's why he's like, this is ridiculous. But very few people actually make that move. Like most people just, it's like we just like accept the intuition. But the possibility that we can have that intuition is dependent on the Christ event actually happening. There's no other way it happens. So, but I don't have that. I hadn't come to understand that fully yet. I'm meandering here a bit. Um, okay, so I'm becoming a Christian anarchist in my political thinking. Um, and then here's where I start my sort of like agnostic arrogance and my de facto um atheism rooted in the problem of evil, um which obviously, I mean, if you listen to everything I'm saying here, there's obviously a lot of cognitive dissonance around that too, because it's like, well, if I was really that deeply concerned about the problem of evil, it's like what is your basis for wanting to make love and reconciliation front and center? If that's really like, if you're if, I mean, if the universe is a universe where like the problem of evil has no resolution, right? Then there's no reason to do that, because it is in fact a meaningless universe, right? Okay. So anyway, but I wasn't aware of that cognitive dissonance like at that time. So one of the things that happens we're reading this book called The Tale of Igor's Campaign, which is widely regarded to be a forgery. But it's a pagan Slavic tale. Um, uh, and the professor, programs at Evergreen are taught by teams. There were the professors in the team of the Great Books program I was in were Patricia Kravchuk, who was Ukrainian and Orthodox, and she's the one who chose that book. And then Argentina Daily, Nils Skov, who was an interesting guy. He was in like, this guy was a literal Nazi hunter. Like he was a Danish guy who had fought in the Danish resistance to the Nazis, and after the war became a Nazi hunter. Like really interesting guy. And his PhD was actually in like maritime engineering. But he was but he was like a polymath who just like knew so much about everything. So there he was. So he was teaching in a Great Books program, even though his academic background is in engineering. So he's a fascinating dude. And then Richard Alexander, who was he pushed me more than any professor I ever had in college. He took a personal interest in me and really pushed me to like, he's like, you have to do more than just what's like, if you're gonna, I mean, if you're serious, like if you're serious about this, you need to do more than just what's the required reading, in the course. You need to go outside that and expand yourself, which is why when I wrote my paper on Christian anarchism, that's why I started going and bringing in outside sources, because I like took his advice seriously, because he kind of like, I'd always gotten good grades, and he kind of like, the first couple papers I produced for him, he was like, didn't give me very good marks. And then but then eventually he's like, he ended up like, once I started doing the kind of work he thought I was capable of, he started praising me and encouraging me. So just, which is what a good teacher should do. Anyway, so Patricia Kravchuk had chose this Slavic tale that may or may not be a forgery. It's an interesting read either way. And we discussed whether it was a forgery or not as one of the things we talked about when we were reading it. But as part of our while we're studying this Slavic text, um, Patricia Kravchuk arranges a field trip to this Russian Orthodox, or actually Ukrainian Orthodox chapel in rural Washington State. That's was probably about 45 minutes away from the campus. Um, and I I go on this field to this church, and um, every so often, so this is like a historic. There's a larger this small chapel that we went to on the field trip is actually attached to a larger church that's actually like closer to the city, but they have this historic chapel that's like 150 years old or something like that, where they occasionally have services. And when they have services in the historical chapel, the services are in Old Church Slavonic, which is why um she wanted us to go there, because she wanted us to like be able to hear the liturgy in the Old Church Slavonic to give us some like cultural context for the text that we were reading. So she arranged this field trip, and I go there, and it was the most profound spiritual experience I've had in my entire life up to that point. And it's like, oh, so now I'm at but I'm not. I don't instantly become a believer, but it puts this little seed, and it's like, now it's like, okay, I go from like agnostic, who like basically thinks the problem of evil makes it questionable whether the universe has any meaning, intuitively doubts that there can be any finite foundations, to a seeker. Like, so now it's like, okay, there after that experience, there might well be a God. Um um and now I'm going to start looking. So I'm start actively looking. And as I'm at Evergreen, I'm a contrarian by nature. So I'm entering Evergreen. I'm a very progressive young guy that's not at all out of step with like the kind of Evergreen profile. Like,
May I ask, is this the same evergreen
oh
that?
yeah, it's that one.
Yeah,
The
it's the
Evergreen
Bret
State College in
Weinstein
Olympia,
evergreen.
Washington, where I still live, by the way. I'm in West Olympia. I'm like really, I still live close to the campus.
Yeah, I have a good friend who went to Evergreen
Yeah.
too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, but I very much fit the Evergreen profile. And to some extent, but I was still, I was, I was, I don't want to say classically liberal, because that implies libertarian, and I wasn't a libertarian yet, but I was, let's say, classically progressive. Like, and definitely like economic issues were front and center for me. And certainly, and social justice issues too, but I had no, like, nothing prepared me for like the kind of like um at that time, like Evergreen was one of the places where even at that time, like, you're starting to see like this sort of critical theory kind of thinking start to pop up. And I was not prepared for that. So, and because I'm a contrarian, like, it started quickly turning me into what would probably be labeled a classical liberal. So my politics start leaning more libertarian. I'm already like, well, I'm already becoming a Christian anarchist. So I just like, I'm like, and so I kind of like, I actually kind of like apostatize my Christian anarchism a little bit because voluntarist socialism is definitely a part of Christian anarchism, properly conceived. So I start to like, out of this like counter reaction to my evergreen, to my evergreen experience, I kind of like, you know, indulging a little bit more of like a libertarian, like blind faith in markets, right? So I start leaning more libertarian. I'm really wanting to transfer, and I'm start wanting to transfer to another school. I was like, that's fine. And also like, Richard Alexander is like straight up told me like you don't belong here. He like, and the reason he told me I didn't belong there had to do what had nothing to do with the politics part. He was saying that like basically this he was basically saying the school's gone to hell in a handbasket, like even at that time from his point of view, and like you're too academically serious. You should go somewhere where you can like flourish more. Was more his point. So I start looking for a place to transfer. Like my younger sister is going through some stuff at this time, so it's like I ended up taking a year off from college, and then just kind of like once things were, I still hadn't decided where to go, where I was going to transfer to. So while things were like, and once things had settled down with her, and like I thought she was okay, it's like I start like just taking some classes at like a community college like in my hometown, and then I find finally I'm like, and by this time I'm like full blown neocon. Like just like I'm reading Rush Limbaugh's books, I'm listening to Rush Limbaugh, I'm like reading American Spectator, National Review, and William F. Buckley is like probably my biggest hero at that point. And um so I'm reading National Review and I see this ad for this college. That's a great books college. I'm like, it's in Southern California. I'm like, okay, it's on the West Coast. It's called Thomas Aquinas College. So I transfer. So I'm like, I decide I'm gonna transfer to. I'm like, okay, now I know where I want to go. Um, um, and so I transferred to Thomas Aquinas College. And so I go to Thomas Aquinas College, and for the first time in my life, I'm like around Christians who really can really think, right? Um, like, and not only that, not only they're like the professors are all Thomas, like, and seriously like intellectually gifted Thomas at that. So like they really know how to argue for their position well and convincingly. And I start off like, like resisting, and like kind of being like I have no problem being like the contrarian, and the gadfly, and I embrace that role. And I can remember like I was like I can remember this funny, like I had this one of my instructors, Dr. McAllister. I was like, I don't remember what the overall context of the conversation, but I can remember that I was questioning causality, right? And and this is what he said to me. He's like, if I were to pull out a gun and point it at you right now, I'm betting you would duck. So he's like, yeah, so he's just like, he's just like, he's pointing out like that intuitively, like, I mean, like, basically he's pointing out to me that I'm just playing a language game, that I cannot, he's giving me an illustration to show that I'm playing a language game that I can't actually live out in reality. And so if you're taking philosophy seriously as a thing that might actually have something to say about a reality and apply to life, then it should be a philosophy that does not call into questions intuitions that are so obvious that you cannot act otherwise, right? So, and then like, so So I'm encountering, I'm living. I mean, you have to live on campus at Thomas Aquinas College, and there are no electives. So everyone's studying the same things. It's a very small college. You have to live on campus. There's a strict dress code. There's a curfew. So this is of course the place where I, being a contrarian, this is the place where I would decide, of all places, to start drinking, experimenting, and experimenting with psychedelics, and breaking all the rules. Because of course I would do that there, because even though at Evergreen I was like, I never left my dorm. I didn't go to the drum circles. I just I put a poster of Richard Nixon on my door on the door of my dorm room at Evergreen,
Yeah,
right?
for the audience, this is true.
Contrarian streak.
This is true contrarianism. Other
Right.
gadflies, you need to get on this level.
Yeah, I'm a serious contrarian, and I've been that way for a long time. In fact, I got kicked out of, like, in high school. I got kicked out of my sophomore honors biology class. I don't remember what I said, but I like made my instructor so mad. He's like, and that's like, this is a class that I had like over 100% in because of extra credit. So it's like, um, and Dwayne Rudrud was the name of my teacher. I still remember. So Mr. Rudrud, he looks at me and he's like, Nathan, you would stir shit just to make it stink more. Get out of my class. So he said, and sent me to the vice principal's office, and it's like, so I had to, like, the vice principal had to, like, call him in later, and I apologized, and he liked me. I mean, it's not like he didn't like me. I was a good student and he liked me. It's just like he just like had enough of my bullshit, because I actually do have a tendency to stir shit just to stir shit. So anyway, so of
That's
course
a
Tom.
young man's game. It gets moderated with age,
That's
but
right.
it's still, like, just existence itself, as Jordan Peterson likes to point out. It is this balance or interplay between chaos and order, freedom and constraint. The truth is often, some kind of, if you will, a virtue of moderation, or some kind of force or Tao that's like the balance, that very thin, sharp edge between the two.
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
That's
and
like, yeah, that's basically the core of Aristotle's ethics.
this is how we as a species in a society arrive at truth. We have people who, we have iron sharpening iron. We have struggle, we have tension, we have polarity. And the gadflies are sort of people who ensure that there's always at least a little bit of
Yeah. So
controversy
anyway, yeah,
going on.
I've been in that role. I've been in that role in my life, especially in my youth. So anyway, yeah, so of course, Thomas Aquinas College is like, and in fact, it's like, it was so, like, there's actually, like, it's funny because I was actually more popular at Thomas Aquinas College than I have ever been in my had ever been in my life. Like, people, like, so it's like, I was like, kind of had this rebel bad boy kind of image, which is so weird because that's so not anything I ever was. And like, they actually, like, a lot of the more, like, prim and proper young women would, like refer to me and the other two guys that I hung out with the most as the unholy trinity. So and, like, would warn other young women, like, to not, oh, don't hang out with them, kind of thing. Anyway, so uh yeah, so I'm doing that, and so this thing happens because I'm behaving like that. Like, my dorm mate had invited me to his parents' place in Marin County for Thanksgiving holiday, because it was like too short a holiday for me to bother to go all the way back to Washington from Southern California. So um I'm like, yeah, that's cool. I'll do that. But, like, the night before we were supposed to leave, I got blackout drunk. In fact, I can remember I was laying on the floor of the bathroom in our dorm, and one of the priests, one of the camp, there were like three priests on campus, I think. One Italian, one Irish, and one German priest. And it was the Italian priest whose name I don't remember. I'll get to the priest whose name I do remember in a moment, though. Okay. So it's the Italian priest, and he's like standing over me, and he's like, son, are you okay? And like, I think he's the one who helped me up and get me to my, because I don't actually remember how I ended up getting into my bed. And then I remember like once I was in my bed, I remember like having like the spins really bad. And so and I like blackout. Like I don't even really. Oh, I think we had been at like Caro's, which is like a kind of like a California version of Denny's, and we were studying Euclid, and we were like we were working on like memorizing the Euclidean proofs for that, for what we were studying for that week, and trying to come up with alternate proofs. And then I think we studied Latin too. So yeah, so we also did like we quizzed each other on Latin vocab, and we're studying Euclid, and we're drinking bourbon the whole time we're doing this because they have like these bottomless cokes. So we had a bottle of we had a bottle of Jim Beam with us, and so like a liter bottle of Jim Beam, and I think we polished off the whole thing. And there were like, I know it was me and the other two members of the Unholy Trinity, Eric Reslock and Lee Ray. And um, I think Lee's girlfriend, who was just a really really sweet, awesome young woman, might have been there with us. I don't remember who else, but I'm pretty sure that Stacy, Lee's girlfriend, was with us. Anyway, like I got super drunk. I remember like at one point we were walking in like a like a reservoir or something, and yeah. But anyway, I ended up blacking out, and and my my roommate could not rouse me, so he goes to Marin without me. So I end up but I end up by myself in the dorm. Well, not totally by myself. My friend Jason, who I'm still in contact with, was actually like one of the few people that was still in the dorm. And I had this interesting conversation with Jason, and he is talking to me about like um, uh, some Russian Orthodox writer that he's reading at the time, and I'm questioning my life decisions at this point, and like one of my dorm mates, Adam Gardner, who I think like we don't interact much, but I think I'm like still like in contact with him on Facebook or something like that. But um and he was actually like, we actually had like, for whatever reason, our dorm had like quite a few people from Washington, and like Adam was from Seattle, and he like had been observing my behavior from afar. So he's like, hey, you want to come to a meeting with he's like recovering alcoholic, and so he takes me to an AA meeting with him. And uh I'm like listening to like, I've never, it's funny, like I never really was a drinker at any time in my life other than that. And I've only been to that one AA meeting ever, but I like that was enough to like kind of like scare the shit out of me, and like to see the potential path that was ahead of me if I continued on that trajectory. And I didn't become a teetotaler. Like I just like from that point on, I just like learned to like, drink occasionally in response. I don't really drink it at all anymore because I have gout, and it's it can cause gout flare ups. But for most of my from that point on, it was like I learned to drink like a sane, rational person. So uh, but I'm also like, I'm trying to like, I'm like, what? Okay, so I'm like, kind of like, what am I doing here? I'm making these terrible. My grades are not suffering though at all. That's a weird thing. It's um, like I think my GPA. Well, okay. This is gonna make me. I think my GPA was three. No, it was, yeah, it was 3.7. It should have. It would have been higher, except for my biology class, which was which was. It's a great books college, so we're studying Galen as the biology text. I just found Galen like super boring, so I just kind of like mail. I got a B, but it's like
So this
it
is
was not.
undergraduate we're talking about
Yeah,
at Thomas Aquinas College.
yeah, correct. Yeah. Right. So we're studying Galen for
Were you
biology.
the same age as most of the other undergraduates, or were you
I
older
was a
or young?
little older. I was a little older. Like because I was entering as a freshman and I was 21. Right. So like, but there were some other like Adam. Adam was 25. So I wasn't the oldest, and my friend Eric, Eric and Lee, the other two guys that I hung out with the most, like, well, no, Lee was not quite. Lee was 20 and had a really bad fake ID that somehow he never got questioned because he's from Missouri. He was 20 with a really bad fake ID, but Eric and I were both over 21. Because like I don't even like no one even questioned his crappy fake ID when we were in Vegas. Like there was like one time where it's like we'd had like about 4 glasses of wine in the middle of a campus event. Like they would serve wine at the campus events, and like even like the underage kids were like allowed to drink, but there was like a strict limit. You're like cut off, like this is the cutoff, this is your maximum, and it's like we were getting a good buzz on, and we just like decide spontaneously, hey, why don't we just go to Vegas? So we just, so we ran to the liquor store and loaded up on supplies, and we just took off to Vegas in the middle of the night. And I ended up winning like enough money to cover the expenses of our entire trip on a parlay bet on college football. Which like I started getting actually that story got around campus to the point where like priests were asking me for gambling advice. Anyway, uh, so yeah, okay. So in any case, so that's what's going on, and then so I'm stuck there on campus. I have this conversation with Jason. And then Adam invites me to that AA meeting, and then I'm like, okay, I need to figure out what's going on. So I go to the library, and I had my, I had been, I'd had this, one of my instructors, David Quackenbush, who actually went to Evergreen. He was an Evergreen alum, believe it or not. His degree from his undergraduate degree was in holistic medicine from Evergreen. And then he had his master's in philosophy from Notre Dame, and he was still working on his PhD at that time. He was like my seminar instructor, and he had been bugging me to read Chesterton for a while. So it's like, so I go to the library and I get like a bunch of Chesterton, and it's like I had read C.S. Lewis's, you know, fiction as a child. I had read all the Chronicles of Narnia and the Paralandra series, and I'd read Screwtape Letters too. But I hadn't really read any of his apologetic works at that point. But Lewis was somebody that like whose name I knew, so I got God in the Dock by C.S. Lewis. So it's like God in the Dock, and then G.K. Chesterton's Orthodoxy, and I think also like there a Chesterton biography. It may have been like his autobiography. I don't remember for sure. Because this is like 92. It was a long time ago. Anyway, so I, I'm in the dorm and I'm reading all these books, and it's like, okay, it's like I'm at least a theist at this point, like of some sort. And it's just like, so it's like, in fact, like I'm probably a Christian, but I got to figure out what it's like. And I didn't want to be Catholic. I did not want to be Catholic. And I didn't want to be Catholic because it's like, if I start, because if there is, if there, if I live in a universe where there is a God, like, then, like, what if my mom was right? Because my mom had like always, my mom is a very, how should I describe it? She's a very highly intuitive, like naturally mystical kind of person. At the same time, she's like very committed to her kind of Pentecostal. Depends on what mood you get her in. Like I think the politics like keep her like committed to the tribal propositions more than anything else, because she's very like invested in like conservative politics because of anti-abortion. But it's really the anti-abortion that drives her, which is so it's like her primary reason for being attracted to that is really just it's still it ends up coming down to a moral intuition. So it's kind of like within, but anyway, but like she has these modes where she's like has a very naturally kind of like intuitive mystical kind of bent. It's like she's a songwriter, and she writes like basically exclusively like Christian music. And although it's like it's not like it's nothing like the stuff she writes isn't anything like popular contemporary Christian music. It's more like in like Christian music in like a classical sort of country style. She's from Alabama, so I mean, she um anyway, so she'd always told me like my whole life, like she would be like especially she would like she actually liked to remind me of it more when I was like not a Christian. She would like she would tell me like God promised me that you would have a ministry like John the Baptist. Like she was like she thought I was destined for ministry. Like that was just like her, and she would remind me of it all the time. And she said like when she was pregnant with me, she was like young and like her friends were telling her that maybe she should think about like not continuing with the pregnancy, and like God spoke to her and told her that like that that I would be a boy first of all, like because she didn't know because this was in the this is like in 1970, right? And you don't know the gender until the birth in 1970. So first of all, correctly, so the fact that the gender was correct like enforces her sense that this was the right intuition. Anyway, so she told me that my whole life. So it's like I don't want to become a Catholic because if my mom is right and I become a Catholic, that means I have to become a priest, and that is the last thing I want to do. So it's like I end up I love Thomas Aquinas College uh a lot. I really it was a great place. Um uh I would recommend anybody to send their kids there. Um I I keep trying to talk my son into going there. So but I transferred back because basically for a whole bunch of reasons. One of them was because I have this weird, okay, I'll give you a chance to psychoanalyze me. I have this weird thing where like um I cannot ask for help. Like I just like I have to do things myself and I cannot ask for help. And I had my work scholarship job that I was given. Like I had been working as a line cook in the summers for years and like had a lot of professional kitchen experience. And so it's like when I was applying for a work scholarship job, I asked to be put in the kitchen. And like with my experience, I thought that like I would actually like be like working in the kitchen. But Thomas Aquinas College's approach is like, no, you just like they treat everybody the same and you start at the bottom and you have to work your way up into like the more desirable position. So like I was given a job of like basically like cleaning bathrooms and like this list of stuff. But I had no idea how I was actually supposed to do the job, and nobody trained me. So it's just like I had the choice to either ask somebody what I was supposed to do or to just stop or just to not do it. And I chose to just not do it because I first of all I was resentful of having that position because I thought that like I was actually an experienced line cook who was really good, and there's no reason I shouldn't be actually in the kitchen. So there was that part of it, and then the other part of it is like, nope, I'm not going to ask anybody like what to do because this is not a thing that I have the capacity to do. I do not. I don't like asking for favors. I don't like asking for help. I just I just don't. And I've always had this issue. I really so this eventually this comes to the attention of the financial aid office, and I'll get called in the financial aid office, and they're like, yeah, you're like way behind on your work hours. You like haven't been doing your stuff. And so they put me in. So they put me into. They the way they responded was really kind. Like they just put me in. They were like, okay, that's no problem. You can make it up. And so they put me into a position where I was calling donors, past donors, and like soliciting donations. And I was actually like reasonably good at that. But I'm like really far behind, and it's like I had to give up all my transfer credits to enter because and start over again. And I'm like, like maybe I'm a little bit homesick. So it's like with all those factors, it's like I decide to like leave. So I end up moving back to Washington State, and I ended up finishing up at Evergreen. But what I and the reason I and the, what I just see the thing with Evergreen is like Evergreen is a very unusual like school. So like you can actually just like so what I did when I went back to Evergreen is I didn't do any programs. I didn't do any Evergreen programs. I just went back into independent contracts the rest of my time at Evergreen. So I would just like write a contract for what I wanted to study, find a professor who would sponsor it, and do it. So I did like I did a contract on like the like on the history of Marian theology. I did a contract on early church fathers. Um, as I got closer to graduation, it's like holy crap! This great book stuff is awesome, but I might have to actually get a job. So it's like I need to have some skill set. So I did an internship as a sports writer, and I did a research paper on the history of Negro League baseball because it's like okay, I'll just do this. I'll try to become a sports writer and do journalism. So I changed my major to journalism toward the end of my college career after having basically studied great books like the entire rest of the time. I spent the last year like you can kind of like say you can Evergreen is a liberal arts college. You can kind of like if you have enough credits, you can kind of justify putting anything as your major. So it's like I ended up it's just your emphasis. So it's a liberal arts degree with an emphasis in journalism based on my research project, my year long research project, and my internship. Um, and I didn't do that until my last year. So um, I at this point I met I met a young woman who had two kids, and well, let's wait. Let me back up. I'm okay, actually missed an important part. Back up. Before that. So like after I left Thomas Aquinas College, it's like I it's basically so I'm like, okay, I know I need to be a Christian, like, but what am I gonna be? So I called up like the smartest Protestant that I knew. Um and who was had been like my debate teacher. Like not my main debate teacher who was like actually an instructor at the school, but we had like an independent outside like consultant who was brought in to just work with the Lincoln Douglas debaters, who I worked more closely with and I had a closer bond with and was really kind of more my teacher anyway. And he was a very smart guy and he was a very skilled debater and had been a mentor to me as a debater. So it's like, okay, if there's a Protestant who's going to be able to talk me out of this is the guy, David Palmer. So I called David Palmer, um, and I think he started as a Methodist, and then he ended up becoming like Church of Nazarene. Um, yeah, I think he may have still been a Methodist at that time. I'm not sure, but he went from Methodist to Church of Nazarene, but I'm not sure if he'd gone to Church of Nazarene at that point. Anyway, I call him up, and it's like I'm arguing with him pillar by pillar over the Reformation, and it's like he didn't have any like good counter arguments to the Catholic position. It's like I'm like and he didn't seem all that invested in it. I think he was just excited that I would. He was just excited. I mean, he was just excited that was becoming a Christian. Period, and he didn't really care whether I became Catholic or Protestant. Like that was enough for him. So it's like he wasn't like super vested in um he wasn't super vested in talking me out of it. And so I decide like, okay, that's it. So then I start. So it's like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to become Catholic and see where that goes. And I'm thinking at this point, it's like I'm resigning myself. It's like I'm gonna probably end up becoming a priest. And in fact, it's like I start looking at the potential of like going to Franciscan University of Steubenville. Like I actually like filled out the application and got accepted. Like so I was like really seriously thinking of going to Steubenville and going to seminary. Um, and I I so I converted to Catholicism in '95, 3 years after I left Thomas. No, two years after I left Thomas Aquinas College, because I was in Thomas Aquinas College was '92 to '93. So 2 years after I left Aquinas, Easter '95, I was confirmed, and I'm applying to Steubenville, and I'm still at Evergreen at that time, like doing independent contracts. Um, and but I'm almost finished, and I'm considering this move and applying. And then I meet this woman who is like, um, I'd only had up at this point, I'd only had one previous relationship in my life that was very brief with a woman who like literally threw herself at me at a party. Like, and because like I had never knew how to talk to girls. Never ever knew how to talk to girls. In fact, when there was this one, okay, this funny Thomas Aquinas story, another one. So, uh, we had this. There was one night when we were all kind of like hanging out in the common room of our dorm, and we were like, we did this. We were doing this thing where like we're just kind of like everybody's getting to know everybody better, and like everybody's putting forth like we're giving people titles, right? So and like the two titles I was given as a result of this conversation was first of all, my friend Jason like nominated me for Minister of Psychedelic Mushrooms. So because of like the whole like experimenting with psychedelics thing that I mentioned earlier. And then someone else who I can't remember who it was like nominated me for Babe Magnet Who Doesn't Know It. So it's like but I just never knew how to talk to girls. Anyway, um so my first relationship is just with this girl who like threw herself at me at a party. I like there I had other young women who I knew that like whom I knew had crushes on me, but I just wasn't interested in. But like anyway, but this is so my first relationship. It's just like this girl throws herself at me at a party, and it's like I try to take something that was had no dignity and tried to give it some dignity by trying to actually form a relationship with her. It didn't work out. I think we were together for like maybe 2 months. It was very, very short. So, and that's the only relationship I've had at this point. So I meet this young woman who has already has 2 kids and has just like left her husband in uh in Nevada, and it's like I ended up falling for her and falling for kids at the same time. In fact, maybe I fell for the kids more than it was her that I fell for. And it's like so it's like I ran off to Nevada with her and just um started like you know working as a cook again, and then um uh um the she ended up like she ended up having a bunch of affairs, and uh I thought maybe if we moved back to Washington that things would get better. So we moved back to Washington. We had a we had my daughter Gloria as a result of this relationship. We never did get married. One of the reasons that she talked me into one of the ways she talked me into moving to Nevada with her was like, oh, it'll be easier for us to get married in Nevada. But then once we actually moved to Nevada, we never actually did get married. So even though I wanted to, and so um I'm still like so I still consider myself Catholic at this time, and in fact, I'm arguing like pro-Catholic. Her family is very evangelical fundamentalist, and I'm arguing theology with like her her sister's husband and her dad, and like
Something has happened. I'm not sure if it's the connection or can you hear me?
are you back? I think my
Yeah.
headset went out. Sorry about
Okay,
that.
okay.
Yeah, yeah. Just my headset went out for a second.
Well, you said that her family were very Protestant in their.
Super, yeah, very evangelical Protestant, and just stock standard. Um, and in fact, well, the only actually her dad was specifically very Baptist, like one of those like Baptists who actually took seriously the claim that the Baptist Church can can trace its origins to John the Baptist kind of Baptist, like and so I would argue with them, and I was still considering myself Catholic very much at this time, but it's like because of the life I'm living, I'm not really practicing at all. So we moved back to Washington, and I start going to I start going to mass again. You know, going and going to confession, but I'm still living with this woman who I'm not married to and won't marry me, and she continues to like in Washington nothing changes, and she continues to have affairs like eventually like but I wouldn't end the relationship. It's like because uh for like mainly because of the kids, and also it's just like I feel like it's a failure if I don't somehow figure out a way to make it work, despite everything that's going on. So she one of her best friends committed suicide, and she became super depressed and suicidal, and was like she was like burning herself with cigarettes and cutting herself, and at one point and then she starts like basically not caring at all, like so she actually like so she brings a guy, she's super drunk, she brings a guy home from the bar with her. I had been sleeping on the couch with my daughter, um like not wondering when she was going to come home and what was going on, and it's like I just politely asked him to leave because like she was like super out of it, and um she was like wanting to go back out, and I'm like you're not in any state to go back out, because like I was concerned, like so she she goes into the bedroom, and she tries to hang herself in the closet. So I help her. I mean, I stop her from hanging herself in the closet. Her immediate reaction is to run to the phone, call the police, and claim that I assaulted her. But the only problem is, and the like, and who knows what would happen with that, except for she immediately told the truth to her cousins who like came over afterwards, after like the police took me away and I spent the night in jail. And so like I had a really incompetent like public defender who was like just basically doing nothing for me. So it's like but I know that she's told the truth to her cousins like immediately after the fact. So it's like I'm like I'm going to call the prosecutor myself if you don't do anything, and like let him know. And he's like, "No, you can't do that. You shouldn't do that." I ignored him and I did it. I called the prosecutor, and like it resulted like within a week like they like dropped the charges. But there's like there's this whole time while that's being resolved, there's a no contact order. So she's moved her boyfriend into the apartment, and so it's like there's no, so she basically made it so that like it was ended whether I wanted, no matter what I wanted. So she did me a favor, really. I mean, honestly, she did me a favor, but I would probably not have had, because I probably would have never had the will to get out of it. So I moved back to my hometown, got a job uh, as a sous chef at a little bistro in my hometown, and I then uh, I started going to church again, and then like I I met my wife, my first wife, like around this time. Um, and we were like, so I'm talking to you about 1998 right now. That's like 1998. That's like when this whole thing is happening. I can remember like when I first moved back to my hometown, it was like right around the Super Bowl. And it's like I think it was like who was in the Super Bowl? I think it was the Ravens. Like it was that first Ravens team, like the Trent Dilfer quarterback Ravens team. So maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was like early '99. I think because I think that was
So
'99.
this is a useful method of dating, by the way.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's a
Yeah,
useful method of
yeah.
chronological arrangement.
So I think that Ravens team was it '99 or 2000? No, it had to have been. I think it had no, it had to have been '98 because I was married in '99. So I think it had to be it had to be '98. It had to be '98. So it might have been very early '99. But in any case, like my sister like introduces me to this friend of hers. My sister's like she's finishing up her my sister's an English teacher. She's just finishing up her teaching program at St. Martin's College this time. And like one of her classmates at St. Martin's is was my first wife. And um I was introduced to her actually when I was actually introduced to her when I was still with Jennifer, that's my daughter Gloria's mother. Um and like I remember thinking she was really cool. Like she was like she was a poet. I was writing I this is after I had started writing poetry. And my sister is a writer. So we kind of like we're getting together at this little and then another like my girlfriend's cousin Aaron is also a writer. So like we're all getting together at like this little like pub and like reading poetry. And I've always been kind of a Francophile. Actually, at one point in high school, at one point in high school, I like thought I was pretty sure I wanted to major in French in college. Um, and probably the only reason I didn't end up majoring in French was because my French teacher could not get approval to do an independent study with me because my school did not offer fourth or a fifth year French. And I had finished 3 years of French already as a sophomore. And in fact, he already had me doing like independent, like extra assignments. Like, so he had me like doing some translation work like on the side. Um, uh, and in fact, one of the things I did is like I did I worked on a translation of the Chanson de Roland the um from the Old French.
It's a very old song. It's about killing Muslims,
Yes,
basically, right?
yeah, yes, it's very
AOI.
old. Yeah, it's very old.
Not that I
So
think that's nice or good.
no, but so yeah, like I was doing a side project, and it's like he's like yeah, like he kind of figured he could just keep doing that, right, and like give me like fourth and fifth year French credit by just giving me side projects and kind of like monitoring what I was doing. And but the administration wouldn't approve it, so it's like oh, so I just switched to Spanish and studied Spanish too. Um, uh, and you know, languages is like if you don't keep studying them and using them, it's like you lose them. So, but yeah, I was very so. But she was writing French poetry, right? And I'm like, oh, like she'd actually, some of the poetry she was reading was actually written in French. And so it's like, oh, this woman is very cool. I'd like to get to know her better. And that was actually like shortly before my relationship completely collapsed due to forces. And once that relationship was actually ended and I'm trying to put my life back together, like my sister like invites me to an event at St. Martin's College where this friend of hers is going to be there because they're both getting awards for their poetry from the college, like because of their contributions to like this student like literary journal. And like so they're both doing poetry reading. Um and it's like I'm like, okay. So I'm like, I told you I could never talk to girls. The same thing applies even with my wife. It's like I had to like a junior high kid. I had to like, hey, will you see if she's open to me calling her and asking her out? Like, so I have to use my sister as an intermediary before I even get the nerve up to call
You should
her.
have had like a very attractive and personable friend convey your poetry to her, and then just hope that she didn't fall in love with the friend. That
oh,
that
oh,
that
that's so funny because the Cyrano de Bergerac is like that is I love that play so much. I love that play so much. And like my absolutely like one of my top five favorite films of all time is the 1990 French language adaptation with Gerard Depardieu as Cyrano. I love that film so much.
yeah, he has the nose for that. That's
Yeah, right. It's just so yeah. It's just really good. Like oh my gosh, like the No Merci scene in that particular production is just like so well done. I just love that. And it's very much like kind of my spirit too. It's like no, I'm gonna do it on my own. Damn it.
yeah.
You know, it's like I mean it's obvious like why I identify with that character. In any case, so
Let's pause the
yeah,
recording right here.
okay.
I'm going to just use the what we were talking about was well there was the person who was to become your first wife, and she was
Yeah,
receiving an award for her poetry
right.
basically.
Yeah, let me backtrack. Let me backtrack really quick, and then I'll get back to telling the story of my first marriage. But there is something important on the theme of universalism that I need to address. And that is so as I'm becoming Catholic, I'm becoming like very, very like rigidly conservatively Catholic. Like this is around like so my conversion was in '95. That's also the year that my grandfather died. And it's like I had gotten to the point like where I was so rigid in my Catholicism that I'm like, no, my gay dad is going to burn in hell, and I just have to accept that. So, um, um, and that because it's just like, well, that's what the arguments say. You know, that's what the arguments say, so must be true. Um, Aquinas can't be wrong. Eternal conscious torment must in fact be the case. So, um, and then my grandfather dies, and then I gave my grandfather's eulogy, and that was the moment where it's like I knew that was the thing that made me understand like to truly understand the Christian story that I was trying to live into. Like universalism was a part of that vision, and the eulogy I gave was a eulogy about my grandfather's life, but it was also a eulogy that was focused on the restoration of all things as its core message. That was my theme for the eulogy, was the restoration of all things, and how like the only way that this universe is not meaningless is through the restoration of all things. If the restoration of all things is not the story, then we're all wasting our time. Like that's the restoration of all things is the only story that makes sense of anything. So this is the theme for my eulogy. And
The only thing that makes sense of the problem of evil in some way too.
right. So this right, which breaks up the rigidity of my Catholicism and kind of like opens the door for me to end up on a different path. So then getting back to meeting my first wife. And this, I mean, we were married for like 18 years. So this was like, it was not a failure of a marriage
Yeah,
entirely.
let me ask a question about when you were eulogizing your grandfather.
You bet.
Are you saying that at the time that you delivered the eulogy, you were convinced that some restoration of all things, including a reconciliation of all souls, would take place? So are you saying, like, prior to the delivery of that eulogy, you had already sort of undergone an internal um, uh, metamorphosis, if you will, into something like a
The
Catholic
event of
Universalist?
the event of my grandfather dying just like brought home, I knew I wanted to write the eulogy because, like I said, this is like, he was my best friend in addition to being my grandfather. So it's like I knew and I was a, I mean, I was a championship platform speaker and debater. So it's like, like not only like, so it's like I knew I had the deep connection, but I also had the skill set to deliver a really high quality eulogy because I'm an excellent platform speaker. So it's like I knew I wanted to do it, because I knew it would honor my grandfather, because I would give him a eulogy that would be memorable. And I did in fact do that. And in fact, like, my atheist aunts were weeping. They were weeping. Like, uh, and I can remember the look on my dad's, like, I remember hugging my dad afterwards, and my dad was so moved by it too. And it's like, um, so like, I never doubted it from that point on. I never doubted it from that point on. That that's how the story has to end.
There are 2 points I want to make here
Sure.
because they've been occurring to me throughout your whole story, basically. Two things. I think we're both. I know we've both read books by David Bentley Hart. I think that uh, uh, in our different ways, we're both fans of his.
Yeah.
And there is something that David Bentley Hart wrote in a sort of précis or an interview about his book, That All Shall Be Saved. And he said, what I'm arguing in this book is that if the Christian story is internally coherent, and I'm not insisting that it is, these are his words, then the only way that it is coherent is uh, uh, when it results in salvation for all. And a lot of the not the only his arguments didn't solely depend on his considerations of what a person is and the interrelationships that a person is composed of.
Right.
But that was one of his major premises. And at this point, I want to ask you a sideways question and ask you whether your experiences with psychedelics, in particular mushrooms,
Yeah.
actually connected in any way with that argument of
Yes.
David Bentley Hart's.
For sure. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Like, it's like, the thing about those experiences is those experiences, like, they give you a window into the fundamental connectedness of all things. So it makes you like, it turns that kind of thing, that kind of like relational metaphysical thinking into anything but like, very much not an abstraction. It's like, this is talking about reality as it actually is. So if you've had that experience, this is very much not a word game that's being played, that is in fact actually what holds reality together, that it is in fact this like massive, like, interconnected web of relation, then that's what holds everything together. Which is which is why salvation has to be universal, because our 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 fate is ultimately not our fate alone. We are our brother's keeper in a far more deeper level than we understand. Like, there's, I think orthodoxy, like, kind of has, like, it doesn't get this perfectly, but it kind of has a kind of like a built-in understanding of this. Like, I talked about it, the spontaneous conversation we had yesterday. I ended up mentioning this, but like, in Orthodox countries, I don't know if it's still done, but but at least in the past, like, when a country like went to war, the entire country would be excommunicated. Like, because that would seen as representing like a failing of the church to be the church. So it had like, so it kind of has this sense of like just exactly how interconnected things are. So it's, even though like, so in a way, like, you know, you are in a way responsible for everything. And yeah, so yeah, yes, so definitely the answer to your question is yes. So
Yeah, and I mean, certainly it's going to sound like a poor argument for universalism, and a sort of morally self-discrediting one to those who are, let's say, approaching things from a very, from what Luke, our friend Luke, would call a sort of logically atomized mindset,
right,
a spirit of anti-communion, a spirit of, well, sort of abstract, if you will, left brain manipulation of sort of abstract icons for narrow, self-advancing instrumental purposes, where theology almost is a power game of, being the one who is right, and
right,
having others submit or be heretics. And the thing is, I'm fairly convinced that if you follow the logic long enough, you'll see that it actually terminates in universal salvation. But at
right.
the same time, I suppose there's not sufficient time to get into these matters here. Although it would be interesting to see to see how you, with your background in debate, would handle certain common objections that are leveled against universalism.
Right, right, right.
But at this
Well, I
point,
think I think David Bentley Hart. I don't really think that there's in terms of like just from the argumentatively the way Hart does it. I don't know if there's much improvement to be done, because I think what maybe David Bentley Hart does as a theologian is like he completely embraces the methodology of the ancient
classical
Christian
theism.
of the ancient Christian Neoplatonic tradition, and so he uses those methods, but then he corrects its errors
Hmm.
on its own terms.
Hmm.
On its own terms. So it's like he doesn't try to like he doesn't try to use like some like philosophical advancements of modernity. He's like within operating within the classical system. He shows where the classical system got some things wrong, and he points toward the parts of this classical system that didn't get it wrong. The parts of the patristic tradition that actually did see universalism as a necessary part of the picture.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, that book, That All Shall Be Saved, I am sort of inclined to agree with you that there's not much left to be added in terms of improving that case for universalism. And the reason I say that is I think that the two most powerful philosophical intuitions which incline me toward universalism, which is not, by the way, a position which I claim to know with certainty. It's just
Right.
a position which I'm inclined to, primarily from philosophical argumentation, but also from internal moral conviction. The first is this idea that humans are always striving epectatically, as Gregory of Nyssa might have put it, in a manner characterized by epectasy, or these sort of upward spirals of striving toward the good. And that, if you understand evil as the absence of the good,
Right.
a privation, a poverty, a privatio boni, or what have you, then it makes sense that even in our fumblings or our failings, we're actually still reaching for some good, which, especially in terms of classical theism, is God. And so, the idea that God is the good and that evil is a privatio boni sort of necessitates this understanding of all human striving, where it is intrinsically aimed toward God, and failure is caused by ignorance. So, I so there's, on the one hand, there's the idea, the way that I like to put it is, if the good is objectively good, that means it's good for reasons of which one is either ignorant or cognizant. And if
Right.
the reasons why the good is good are, what we claim they are, then cognizance of those reasons should result in one doing the good.
Right.
And it follows, by deduction, that failure to do the good is due to ignorance. And then there's the limits of human agency, which, so you have the nature of the good on the one hand, and you have
Right.
the limits of human agency on the other.
Mhm.
And Hart argues for that in a certain way, and I have it another way. I
Right.
argue for each of these two ideas in different ways than he is, but if you zoom out, it's clear that we're leveraging the same two ideas. And but there's a lot in that book that I would never have been able to come up with on my own.
Right.
It's a very good argumentation. It's a very, very good book.
Yeah. It is a very good book. It is a very good book, but ultimately, like, to me, it's like, and this is the weird thing for me, is like, ultimately, like, um I'm actually, maybe because of the psychedelic experiences, but for me, like, the necessity of the restoration of all things being the only coherent story that you can tell, like, that to me is a deeper reason. It's a deeper reason. And the reason it's a deeper reason is, like, first of all, I mean, you can argue, you can actually make it, you can make an argument for it rationally. But the other thing is like, it's it's a very deep moral intuition at the same time. And it also is like, I think it I think it does I think it does in fact reflect, like, um the the directional trend of reality. Let's put it that way.
Right. And there is a way in which, I'm not going to say it changes the gospels or gives us a quote unquote a different gospel, as perhaps certain evangelicals would like to say. But when you read George MacDonald's books like The Light of the Gospel or something like that, and you read his descriptions of Judas's reconciliation with Jesus, and understand how on some level the story and the figure of Jesus demands something like this. If Jesus is truly ultimate, the Son of God, where God is understood as love and Jesus is the ultimate moral example. This is what God himself would do if he were in human form. This is love incarnate. What does it do? And, in some level, some of this is left open to the human imagination, and George MacDonald has an amazing
Oh,
description.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love McDonald. And I was like, I had this odd thought this morning, as I was making my coffee. I often have odd thoughts in the morning while I'm making my coffee. And it's like, I was actually thinking about, like I was thinking about, like, okay, so why is it that the fallen angels are cast down, right? Why was it that they're cast down? Um and so heaven is an eternal realm, right? And um so no change can happen in the eternal realm. So the greatest mercy that you could show to a fallen angel is to cast them down from heaven. Because if they're cast down from heaven into the if they're cast down from heaven, in closer to within the realm of time and change, then there is a chance for them to be changed. And, like, I think that's one of the, I mean, there's always been this sense, like, even in older Jewish tradition, there's always been this sense that, like, the what what humanity is here to do is to help in the process of repairing the world and mending that brokenness.
Yeah, what's
And
that
if
phrase?
that's
Tikkun olam, something like that.
olam haba,
Oh,
olam
oh,
haba, yeah, the repair of
the
the
olam
world.
haba is like the age to come, and the mending the world is like I thought it was anyway. You probably know better than I do.
Oh yeah, you're right. You're right. No, it's Tikkun Olam. Yeah, yeah. Olam haba is the age to come, and Tikkun Olam is the repair of the world. You have it
But
right.
it's very interesting that you bring up this idea of sort of God punishing the angels with temporality, but the temporality actually being in some way
A
perhaps
mercy.
the ultimate means of their redemption.
Yeah,
Because
right.
it's this same idea, or the obverse of it, which Thomists will leverage in their arguments for why no one can be saved post-mortem. It's
Right.
because after death, like
Well,
the
that's
spirits.
it's familiarity with that Thomist argument is what made me
Right,
make the move to
right.
reverse.
And
Um,
the truth of the matter is that one always sees ways in which God can save us from ourselves. And if he's good, will he not avail himself of them? It's an open question, but so many
right,
people have
right.
decided preemptively that the answer is nope, you can't. Why? Because after death comes the judgment. It's like
Yeah,
that means that there's no hope of universal of salvation post-mortem. I've never even seen how that logically follows. But
right. Well,
um,
also it's also like it's also like it's because of the curse of individualism too, though, because it's like it's a failure to understand like what a person really is, because the more you have a sense of a person as just like this atomized individual, like self-contained thing, the easier it is for you to accept a view like that. If you start to understand a person as something that as a fundamentally relational creature, always, that is defined not just as an atomized individual, but in all of the various relations that a human has to other humans, and to lower parts of the creation, and to the higher parts of the creation, like as like the strands of relationship that tie it together to the rest of the hierarchy. When you start to think of a person in that way, then it becomes much easier to understand why universal salvation is actually the more logical end result, because those strands are interwoven, and that web is connected. And um, I would actually I would actually find it easier to believe I would actually find it easier to believe that there is a possible case of universal damnation than to believe that God elects some for salvation and some for damnation. Like that actually, like to me, it's like I can see an argument being made for that, because uh, because love cannot be coerced. And if God wants to have a universe where love is a possibility, then there has to be a degree of freedom. But we could collectively fail to live into that eternal peace of God that is resting in God's love that he intends for us. We could collectively fail to do that in toto. That to me seems to be a possible outcome logically. I don't think it is. I don't think it is, because I don't think I think that's what providence really is, rather than mapping out like a specific teleology that dictates everything that happens in space-time. What it actually is a constraint that makes sure that inexorably God will draw everything to himself. And that is the final story. So I believe that God constrains that from being an outcome. And it is only by the grace of God that that is not a possible outcome.
you know,
So,
there's something interesting that occurs to me in the context of David Bentley Hart's argument, and your experiences and intuitions and arguments in connection with the idea that the sort of the self-identity of a person, it cannot be understood uh, uh, divorced from the relationships, because in truth that self-identity is composed of those very relationships, and that yourself is something given to you in as it were, mirror like reflections that other people hold up to you when you interact with them. And it's a identity which emerges only in relationship, with other people. And so the idea that some might be saved but others damned is in some ways analogous to entering heaven with your arm or your leg, or a piece of your heart, maimed and
Right.
torn away, which of
Right.
course recalls the saying of Jesus, it's
Right.
better
Right. Right.
to pluck out your eye and throw it into Gehenna than go there
Right.
in one piece. But the question is like, how are we to interpret this? Is that perhaps more a statement about self-control and saying that you need to mortify certain sinful urges in yourself, or is it really a way of saying that actually God is prepared to take only some of us into the kingdom, uh, maimed and without the relationships which are essential to ourselves? It's a kind of, yeah, I think that the way to approach these questions is almost like in a spirit of rabbinic imaginary dialogue with Jesus, and ask, is this
Sure.
the
Sure.
interpretation that we were supposed to
Sure.
take?
Right. Yeah. 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 Well, the other thing is like, like the other thing is like, to me, it's like, I mean, it's like, I still take hell seriously. It's like, I don't not believe in hell, right? Especially if your definition of hell is like being separated from the peace of God, resting in the divine love. Guess what? We are all in hell,
That's right.
or at least have been in hell,
That's right.
and may return to hell again. And that it is always only by Christ's action of descending into hell and offering us that hand that we are ever restored from it. So hell is very real.
Indeed. And here's another sort of question for the rabbi. When Jesus descended into hell, was it just to do a sort of victory lap around the spirits who
Right?
must
Yeah,
forever
that's
languish
that
there?
is in fact the
Or
Calvinist version. It's like, yes, I won. I'm dunking on you. That's yeah, that's Calvinist Jesus. That's exactly what he's doing. He goes there he goes there to show the power and majesty. But here's the thing: it's like this is okay. This gets back to my Christian anarchism, which like so I very early my Christian anarchism very early on saved me from ever falling into that particular error, because I understood that like no, the divine hierarchy is a hierarchy that is based on love and reconciliation, where humility and not power and domination are the dominating principles. It's actually like a literal reversal of of what our systems of hierarchy are. And that Calvinist sort of theology is definitely based on, it's on the model of the prince. Like the prince is the prince is the model of God in that. It's like tied to these like
are you
there's
talking
it's not
about
an accident.
Machiavelli?
It's not an accident that the modern theory of the state is being developed at the same time as this theology.
Okay.
They
Yeah,
go
yeah.
hand in hand with one another.
The
Like,
the sovereign monarch.
yeah, exactly. So it's like sovereign God, sovereignty. There's that isn't Jesus says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father.
Mm,
Let's just take him seriously at that,
mm, mm.
because Jesus does not act like a sovereign monarch.
Indeed.
His sovereignty is through his humility and self-sacrifice. That's what makes him sovereign. His
Right.
perfect humility and self-sacrifice.
And
That's what the
he
model
forgives the
is.
Jews as they crucify him. He doesn't say,
Yes.
Father, damn them
Yeah.
immediately. They heard your perfect message, but they refused it, and therefore they're reprobated.
Right.
Um, but this reminds me of a quotation from George MacDonald, where it's like, because this idea of the sovereign monarch, it's like his power is itself completely lawless. Maimonides called God a monarch who rides in his carriage, and before he makes the decision, he does not know which way he's going to turn, right or left. This is like completely law. This is law without law. It's like a kind of unconstrained absolute power.
Right.
And George
Right.
MacDonald
Which
said,
exactly, and it's there's kind of there's an inversion of potency and act. Like in Aquinas, like
yeah,
God is pure act, right? Like it which is why you get all this sort of like possible worlds theory and all this kind of thing. It's
correct,
like we want
correct,
God to be like the imaginative, like unlimited potential space of like the Renaissance artist, which isn't anything. That's not actually what God is. God is actually that which limits and constrains
mm,
and draws everything to rest in the perfect peace of his eternal love.
mm.
So yeah.
Well, MacDonald said that he said that mere lonely power has no power to create, but that love is the power of power. So if you worship only power, you're going to get a certain God. And it's like you worship him primarily because you're afraid of what his exercise of that power could do to you. And you just want to stay on the right side of this essentially arbitrary wielding of power that follows no laws that we can discern or understand. It certainly has no connection with what we think of as morality, or no necessary connection. That's view one. Or view two is that the whole operating force behind this power is love. What was that description you gave me of God, where you said it was something like prime motion but agapic? Do you remember?
Oh, I was talking about like, okay, so I was talking about how I was like trying to like defend like the notion of divine impassibility, while like trying to understand how God can have like sort of a kind of emotiveness to him. And what I had suggested was that that God is the God as God of the as the unmoved mover is not himself moved, but is motion.
Motion.
Right. And the nature of that motion is love. Like that's what it is. It's like,
Yeah,
it
it is.
flows.
It's this highest derivative, or it's the power of power. It's the most basic
Yep.
thing, the most
It
basic
is literally the
motive
thing
thing.
that creates.
Yeah.
It is the thing that creates. It is like that, like agapic love is the power of creation. And it is the power that creates a universe. And like if you look at like when we are actually in our own human activity, properly inhabiting the sub-creative role that we've been given, that's what we're doing too. We're modeling that pattern. We're you like true creation, truly worthy creation happens through agapic love.
Nate,
And
I
it
hate.
differs fundamentally from like kind of egoic kind of creations.
Oh yeah, for sure, because that kind of creation is entirely self-directed, whereas the love is like self-giving and outward flowing. But Nate, I hate to do this to you, because I promised you the ability to have a long interview, but I'm wondering if we can wrap things up to your satisfaction within these last 5 minutes, and kind of
Yeah, we
do
can.
everything
Yeah,
within a neat
yeah,
2 hours.
yeah. No problem. No
Yeah.
problem. Like I could talk all day.
Yeah, well, in some ways,
So
the good thing is that we've gotten there.
yeah,
We managed to set up that kind of foundation of the personal, which in some ways is necessary somehow to the discussion
I think
of
so.
these kind of
I think it
loftier
is.
abstract
Right.
things. But
Right.
I guess I wanted to give you these last 5 minutes to kind of make whatever final points and observations, be they autobiographical or be they philosophical, that you wanna make.
Yeah, I would just say so now that Luke has drawn it to my like I'm okay. I'm not very I don't like in my adult life I have very little interaction with like evangelical world. So I had no idea who Rob Bell was. So I will just say that Rob Bell is correct. And that the story is love wins. That's the story.
Yeah, a lot of universalists shy away from that, and they say, well, I don't really think it's as simple as love. I'm not that mushy-headed, you know. I believe it's something more abstract, like the source of all things is also their end, and so things begin in God, they end in God, universal, which is all true.
It's all
But
true.
at the same time, it kind of is as simple as
It
love is.
is. Right.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean honestly, I there is more okay, there is a more fundamental truth in the Beatles song Love Is All You Need than the entire Westminster Confession.
this is a hard saying. Who can hear it? It's well, the thing about it is that, like Luke and I talk about this all the time, like some of the best Christians that we know are Calvinists. Like Luke
Yep.
and I really admire John Piper.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like Douglas Wilson. In some ways I was converted to Christianity by Douglas Wilson.
Right.
um um but
Can I say
uh
this in defense of Calvinism really quick?
yeah,
I will say this. This is the one that to me this is the there is there are the seeds of a Calvinist universalism.
indeed.
They are the seeds of a Calvinist universalism, and and the seeds of a Calvinist universalism is just take sola gratia deadly seriously. deadly seriously. Make that the center point of your theology, and you can have a redeemed Calvinism that tells the right story.
Yeah, there is. Well, I don't. You should never take me as an expert on any given theologian because the truth is I don't read. My ADHD is too severe. But my understanding is that Barth. Well, no. So the thing is, Barth seems to at least have been ambiguous on the question of, whether or not all are saved in the end, and maybe he in fact denied it. But it seems like at least within Barthian theology, there is room for some understanding of unconditional election in Christ that is, in fact, universalistic. And many people have argued that this is, in some ways, like sort of inescapable logical direction of certain Reformed arguments. I mean, who knows what to make of all that? And again, maybe we're up against a time constraint here, but.
Yeah.
But yeah. I don't know. I thought you might have something to say about the.
Oh, I think I've known some Reformed Universalists. Like, so I think that the possibility, I think the possibility exists within the framework. So this is where I would disagree with David Bentley Hart. I would say that. Well, I would say that it does. Okay, I would say in a general reform. Well, first of all, like, MacDonald was a Presbyterian minister. So yes. There's that. Yes. So obviously it's possible because, like,
I didn't know that, but yeah, I'm agreeing.
Yeah, MacDonald is a Presbyterian minister. So yeah. Somehow he, even though his training and formation was as a Presbyterian minister, somehow he came away as like one of the, as far as I'm concerned, he's like, to me, there's more beauty to what MacDonald does, and I find it actually more powerful than what David Bentley Hart does.
Yeah, I agree.
And like, because he understands that really it's the story that matters.
Yeah.
That it's really the story, because that's what really we care about.
He has what Luke would call undivided vision.
Right.
He's just like being there in this kind of story moment.
Now, David Bentley Hart has that capacity, and in fact, like his new book, which I've just started reading, "Rolling in the Moonlight," is like very much like he's like leaning in. He's leaning into the writer side of him,
yeah, more
than the systematic thinking side of him, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it really is a book that shows like a really deep understanding of, like, we seem to be in a moment where like the super sensible realm is kind of colliding with the material at an alarmingly rapid rate.
Ooh, because I notice in academia that the momentum is shifting from materialism toward panpsychism. Yeah. I noticed that. I noticed this too, that a lot of people, myself included, whose identity was very centered upon atheism and materialism, have turned to God, maybe for the first time, or maybe back to God, but in a new way. And I'm wondering, is this just something that am I overgeneralizing just based on my own experience? Something
no, happened. I think it's very real. And it's like, the Pentecostal part of me, is like, wants to, I mean, I would just say that, like, to me, it's like pretty obvious, like the Spirit is moving, like God is working. Like, and this is a moment where it does seem to me that very much like the spiritual world is starting to come back into closer contact with the material, or with, well, it always was, but we're regaining the ability to see it.
We ourselves are growing.
Yeah, we're gaining the ability to see it again. I would say, or to put it in Barfieldian terms, it's like you're seeing the beginnings of the move toward the consciousness of final participation. Like, it's happening. Mm-hmm. We're coming out of withdrawal. I think that's pretty obvious. Like, withdrawal is ending. Like, it's collapsed. It's collapsed upon itself, and we're starting to see the spiritual world again.
Well, I think that is a beautiful note to end on.
Yeah.
I think that's the logical terminus of this conversation. Hopefully there will be more such conversations.
I would love to talk to you again. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think so whenever you want, you can stop the recording and we'll
Okay.
talk about what to do with this particular